The film begins with three individuals climbing a mountain, best friends Becky and Hunter and Becky's husband, Dan. As they climb, Dan suddenly starts to lose his footing. Shortly after, he falls to his death, leaving Becky traumatized and depressed. Nearly a year later, Becky is still depressed and abuses alcohol. She sits by herself at a bar drinking. On her way home, she is approached by her father, James, whom she was estranged from because he suggested that Dan was not the right guy for her. Becky doesn't want to talk to him. James argues that if she and Dan's roles were reversed, Dan would have moved on with his life rather than drink himself to death. Becky walks away from him and returns home, devastated and restless. She panic calls Dan's line but is sent to voicemail. Suddenly, Hunter calls her and asks to come over. Not long after, Hunter arrives and comforts her. Hunter is worried that Becky is yet to move on, suggests that they do something to mark the anniversary of Dan's death. Hunter suggests they climb the decommissioned 2,000 feet B67 TV tower in the desert, where she can scatter Dan's ashes as a form of therapy and hopefully get over Dan's death. Becky is initially hesitant at first and refuses, but the next day, she changes her mind and agrees to go. Becky believes that climbing the tower will give her closure and allow her to finally move on from Dan's death. Sometime later, Becky and Hunter drive off on their trip. Becky learns that Hunter is now a YouTuber and Hunter suggests that she makes a video of their trip. At a diner, Becky sees that the tower is very tall, reaching into the sky, and begins to panic, but Hunter assures her she will be safe. That night, Becky has a nightmare about Dan and wakes up from her sleep. The next morning, Hunter and Becky drive off to the tower and are almost hit by an oncoming truck when Hunter is distracted. They finally arrive at the site and run into a group of vultures feeding on a carcass. Becky, who is starting to panic, doesn't find the joke funny. Hunter apologizes and they continue to the tower. When they reach the tower, Becky panics again and begs to go home, but Hunter comforts her and tells her nothing will happen to them. Shortly after, they begin the climb to the tower. As they climb, the bolts and screws begin to loose and unscrew, unknown to the women. Becky almost slips and starts to panic, but they are already halfway through to the top of the tower, so she cannot back out. She pauses to drink some water and they continue to the top. Eventually, they reach the top and the women are thrilled. At the top, Becky scatters the ashes, finally letting Dan go. Hunter makes many videos of them for her YouTube channel. She tells Becky she is proud of her for finally letting Dan go, and the women share a moment of warmth. They hug each other and prepare to climb down the tower after sightseeing for a few minutes. However, as they begin to climb down, the ladder breaks apart and loosens. It falls off, stranding them several feet from the next intact section. Becky almost falls off, but she is immediately pulled back by Hunter. Unfortunately, the backpack with their water and a drone falls onto a communications dish during the struggle to save Becky from falling. During the struggle, Becky is wounded as a piece of the corroded ladder pierces her skin. She ties a piece of cloth around the wound to stop the bleeding, but she is in pain. They are stranded with no food or water in the middle of nowhere since the bag falls just beyond their rope's reach. Becky begins to panic again, wondering if help will come. However, Hunter doesn't seem bothered despite being miles from anyone. Hunter is confident that emergency services will have heard the crash of the ladder and be on their way. She tells Becky to remain calm, but after several minutes, help doesn't arrive. They try to use their cell phones, but they are unable to get a good signal, suspecting that radio interference from the communications dish is blocking the signal. Hunter tries to send a message to her internet followers for help, but the message doesn't deliver. She ties a rope to the phone and tried to lower it to the communications dish, expecting the message, but it doesn't transmit. She then packs the phone inside one of her shoes and intentionally drops her phone off the tower, hoping the padding is sufficient enough to keep the phone intact on impact. However, her phone is destroyed when it reaches the ground and the message never transmits. Suddenly, the pair spot a man and his dog at the bottom of the tower through Hunter's binoculars. They call out for help, but the man doesn't hear them. Becky throws down her shoes to get the attention of the man, but he ignores the shoes. However, the dog hears their calls but cannot alert his owner. The women are becoming increasingly worried and terrified. Later, the pair notice an RV nearby, with two men camping, but there is no way to alert them or get their attention. They then decide to wait until dark. At night, the women fire a flare gun found in an emergency box at the top of the tower, getting the attention of the men. The men see the flare, making the women hopeful as Becky flashes her phone's torchlight to show them where they are. Sadly, instead of helping them, the men steal Hunter's truck and drive off, leaving the women disappointed. As night falls, Becky watches a video of herself and Dan on her phone and notices a tattoo on Hunter's ankle. The tattoo is the number code 143 that Dan used to tell Becky he loved her. Becky suspects that she was sleeping with her husband before he died, but Hunter tearfully admits that she was in a 4-month affair that Dan had drunkenly initiated. The affair lasted until shortly before he wedded Becky. Becky is disgusted as Hunter apologizes. Hunter explains that it was difficult to see Becky and Dan together after their affair because she was in love with him already. However, she decided to keep quiet about it because she didn't want to hurt Becky as they were friends. Hunter continues to apologize, but Becky is unmoved by her apologies. The next day, Becky concludes that it has been 24 hours already and that no help will come. Hunter then decides to climb down and get the backpack so they don't die of thirst. Becky doesn't want her to, but Hunter insists as penance for the affair with Dan. Hunter manages to climb down and reach the backpack, landing on the dish. Since there is no way to climb back to the top, Hunter attaches the backpack to the short rope using her selfie stick. She then leaps to it and climbs up. Becky pulls her up, but when she is halfway through, she almost slips and falls. Becky is scared, thinking Hunter had fallen to her death, but she is safe. Hunter climbs back to the top and they rationalize the bottle of water. Minutes later, Hunter suggests that they use the drone to send a written message for help and send it to the diner a few miles away. The drone suddenly runs out of battery and the pair quickly control it back to the tower. Becky spends the rest of the day recharging the drone using the tower's lamp holder. While Becky is at the top, the vulture from earlier taunts her and she almost falls from the tower. Soon after, there is enough battery in the drone and she remotely controls it toward the diner. However, the drone is hit by a semi-truck before it reaches the diner. Becky becomes hopeless and starts to cry. Becky soon becomes delirious from the lack of food and water. By the third down on the tower, Becky is too weak and cries out to Hunter. Unfortunately, a brief lucid moment allows her to realize that she has been hallucinating Hunter's presence for days. Hunter had died trying to climb back up the tower after she fell onto the communications dish. The next day, as Becky sleeps, the vulture gnaws at her wounded leg, waking her. She carefully waits to attack it and kills it. She eats it to regain her strength and makes one last attempt to get help. Becky climbs down to the dish and sends a text message to her father. She then puts the phone into Hunter's corpse and pushes it off the tower so the message will transmit. She tearfully apologizes to Hunter as she throws her corpse off, feeling sorry that her friend died because of her. Once her corpse hits the ground, Becky's message transmits and James alerts the emergency services. He races off to the tower, where he reconciles with Becky. Becky hugs him tearfully and apologizes for being mean to him. That was all from the video.